Joining me now, President Trump's Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus. Reince, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
I'm happy to be here, Chris.
Great. Let's start with the breaking news that in June of 2016, there was a previously undisclosed meeting, and let's put up all the players on the screen. Donald Trump Jr., this was during the campaign, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and a senior advisor, and then campaign chairman Paul Manafort met at Trump Tower with a Russian lawyer with ties to the Kremlin, Natalia Veselnitskaya. Why did they meet, and why are we just learning about it?
Well, first of all, Chris, I don't know much about it other than what I've communicated with various members there on the screen. It was a very short meeting. It was a meeting apparently about Russian adoption. And after about 20 minutes, the meeting ended, and that was the end of it. And as far as non-disclosure, look, Jared Kushner put in his disclosure a little prematurely. He's since amended it. All of that is disclosed, and it was a nothing meeting. And now, what's developing from that meeting, if you look at the article that Circa put out, is that the individual that set up the meeting may have been affiliated with Fusion GPS, which is an opposition research firm that is being subpoenaed and talked to by the Senate Judiciary Committee about their role in putting together that phony dossier that people know about in regard to the president. So this is a developing story. I don't know much about it other than it seems to be on the end of the Trump individual. It's a big nothing burger, but may spin out of control for the DNC and the Democrats.
Well, let me ask you about two aspects of that. In terms of the DNC, are you suggesting that this was somehow a setup by Democrats to try to link them or compromise them with the Russians? And this was before there was any Russian interference in the election. So why would they have done that?
Well, look, why was Fusion GPS involved in putting together this dossier? I don't know, Chris, and I don't think too many people know why or how this meeting came about. However, what I can tell you is from my communication with our team on this subject, there was nothing to it. It was a 20-minute meeting. It ended after everyone was decidedly sitting there saying there's nothing happening here. They moved on. And I think in the end, what you're going to find in this story, if you read the Circa column, is I think there's more questions on the Democrat side than anywhere else.
And one last question about the meeting. Why would Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and campaign chairman Paul Manafort all want to meet with a Russian lawyer about Russian adoption?
Listen, I have no idea, Chris. You're going to have to talk to them. However, you know, talking about issues of foreign policy, issues related to our place in the world, issues important to the American people like adoption is something that's not unusual. So when you go through a campaign, you're not just talking to one particular group of people about, in this case, adoptions in Russia. You have policy teams talking about our place in Asia, talking about trade in China. You have policy teams that run the gamut.
So this was a foreign policy meeting?
Apparently so.
Okay. I want to clear up, speaking of foreign policy meetings, what really happened in the Putin-Trump summit in Hamburg on Friday. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov says that after Putin denied meddling in the election, he, Trump, this is his quote, said that he accepts these assertions and that President Trump said, this is Lavrov quoting Trump, certain circles in the U.S. are still exaggerating, although they cannot prove this, the topic of Russia's interference with the U.S. election. Reince, is that true? Did the president say what Lavrov says he said?
No, it's not true. The president absolutely did not believe the denial of President Putin. What the president did is he immediately came into the meeting, talked about Russian meddling in the U.S. election, went after that issue at least 2 separate times. This was not just a 5-minute piece of the conversation. This was an extensive portion of the meeting. And after going at it with President Putin more than once, 2 times, maybe even 3 times, the president, at that point, after spending a large part of the meeting on the subject, moved on to other topics.
So to be clear,
like Syria
he does not,
and ISIS and
we're going to get to that. He does not accept Putin's denial. He believes the Russians meddled.
He's answered this question many times. He said they probably meddled in the election. They did meddle in the election. The one thing that he also says, which drives the media crazy, but it's an absolute fact, is that others have as well. And that's true. China has, North Korea has, and they have consistently over many, many years. So, yes, he believes that Russia probably committed all of these acts that we've been told of, but he also believes that other countries also participate.
Let's move to the next subject, which is what is the response? What are the consequences for doing that? And I want to put up a tweet that your president, your boss, has been very busy on Twitter today. I want to put up this tweet. Now it is time to move forward in working constructively with Russia. Does that mean that they're off the hook as far as Russian meddling is concerned?
No, it doesn't mean they're off the hook, but what it means is that we're not going to forego progress simply because we have a disagreement in regard to this meddling in the United States election. What it means is that we need to move forward with things like a ceasefire in Syria, which is going to save a lot of lives, which we're doing I think starting today in southwestern Syria. It means we need to move forward with working together with ISIS. We need to move forward with working together on resolving the conflict in the Ukraine.
So how do you
you can chew gum, walk and chew gum at the same time, Chris.
How do you respond to Democrats like Chuck Schumer who are saying it's disgraceful that the president comes out of this meeting and basically says, oh, we're going to move forward?
Right. Well, we could solve world peace and world famine, and I think Senator Schumer would say the same thing. So look, they're programmatic when it comes to trashing the president. When you look at what President Trump did in Europe in recommitting ourselves to our NATO allies, committing ourselves to our partners in Europe, our partners across the world, committing ourselves to the values of the West, delivering a speech in Poland, which many people said are the best speeches since Ronald Reagan. You look at what he did in Hamburg. I mean, other than our small disagreements on trade and the Paris Agreement, we have unification with our allies.
All right, well, I want to get to that with you, but let's talk about one more aspect of the Trump-Putin meeting, and that is progress on Syria. They did discuss it. Here is how Secretary of State Tillerson described it afterwards.
I would tell you that, by and large, our objectives are exactly the same. Maybe they've got the right approach and we've got the wrong approach.
I want to ask you about that. Secretary of State says the U.S. and Russia have exactly the same objectives and that maybe they have the right approach and we have the wrong approach. Russia, Putin, are backing Assad, who has slaughtered hundreds of thousands of civilians, and they may have the right approach?
Well, look, I think what he may have been referring to is the fact that Barack Obama put a red line in the sand and didn't actually follow through with the threat that he made in Syria, and we find ourselves behind the 8 ball in Syria because nothing happened for many, many years, and now we're from the outside looking in. That all being said, we need to move forward and actually maybe work with Russia on bringing peace to Syria, and I think that's what you're seeing the beginning stages of happening.
But they want Assad. They want somebody who, the butcher of Baghdad, who is slaughtering hundreds of thousands of people.
Maybe not long term. I think it's yet to be seen what is going to be of Assad. I mean, certainly he's a butcher and he's a bad person. And you've seen President Trump act decisively when it comes to Syria. It didn't take him long to pull the trigger in regard to a response to the chemical attack. That's a decisive leader, and that's who the G20 leaders saw in Hamburg, as someone who's decisive, someone who's not afraid, someone who doesn't kowtow, and stands up for himself when it comes to issues of disagreement, like trade and the Paris Agreement.
Let's talk about exactly that subject, because generally at these G20 summits, the meetings of the world's leading economies, East and West, the U.S. sets the tone. But there were a lot of times, and you've just referred to it a couple of times, sharp disagreement over climate change, just completely disagree. And they kind of papered over the disagreement on trade, which still is there. Does the president have any trouble when he's 1 against 19?
No, actually, I think the American people should look at that as a massive positive about this president, that you have a president that doesn't just show up at the G20 and sink into his chair and just suddenly agree with all of these European leaders across the table when it comes to issues that he disagrees on. The president's made it very clear that he doesn't believe the Paris Agreement is fair. Now, you say it's a disagreement. It's really not a disagreement on the environment. It's a disagreement on the Paris Agreement itself and the fact that we don't want to be hamstrung by an agreement that's going to hurt the American worker across the country that the president's pledged to support. We disagree in regard to trade a little bit, and the fact that this president actually believes that trade should be fair, that we shouldn't be taken advantage of. That's something the president's standing up for the American people. That should be seen as a positive, Chris.
Let me ask you a specific question on trade, because the president may decide in the next few days whether or not to impose impose tough restrictions on steel imports coming into this country. Talk about a possible 25% tariff. The head of the European Commission says we are prepared to take up arms if need be. His reaction to the fact that the president may do this. Is President Trump ready for an international trade war?
Well, okay, first of all, the president does what he says he's going to do. He's been talking about steel, aluminum, cars for 30 years, practically my entire life. He believes in the things that he believes in. There's also a national security piece to this, and American people need to understand. If a country loses its ability to produce steel, it loses something in regard to national security. A country cannot find itself importing steel from China, subjected to dumping of steel from other countries, and decreasing its productivity. I don't mean to interrupt, but this is an important issue, not just for trade, not just for the American worker, but for national security.
But you're making the argument that, yes, he's going to impose tough restrictions on steel imports.
My guess is that he will, because he promised that he would.
But then the Europeans are going to impose tough restrictions.
Of course, because, well, maybe they will, maybe they won't. But
well, they say they will.
Advantage of the United States. Many of these countries have been taking advantage of the United States. And part of the reason why President Trump is in the White House is because he told the American people that the time is over for the rest of the world to take advantage of the United States. Now, that'll be
what happens when they impose tough restrictions on our exports to them?
Look,
and then Americans
Chris,
lose jobs.
Other than maybe a few countries, you can't find a trade surplus going the opposite direction from the United States. That all being said, let me just, because we might be running out of time, I want to make it very clear.
We are running
This was
out
a positive meeting. The president set the stage in Europe. The leaders of the G20 came to the president. He was a star in Hamburg, and no one can take that away. And the fact of the matter is, I think he's placing America first, but with that, strategically aligning our allies and making sure that our objectives across the world and the objectives of Western civilization are being met.
One last question. I got about a minute left for it.
Okay.
We're over time. Senate coming back this week, going to take up health care. Mitch McConnell is acknowledging that you may not pass repeal and replace. You may have to work with the Democrats to prop up Obamacare. More Republican senators coming out against it. How much trouble is repeal and replace in?
I don't think it's in half as much trouble as the media wants it to be in, just like it wasn't the case when we went through the House bill the second time around. Everyone said that it was over, and then a few days later it passed. I think that's what you're seeing right now. I think you're seeing members of the Senate putting their wish list together. You have a leader in Mitch McConnell that can get it done. If anyone can get it done, Mitch McConnell, President Trump, working together with the Senate.
Yes or no? Will they pass?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. They will get a repeal and replace bill done. I believe that.
Before the August recess.
Maybe before, maybe a little bit into it, but I know that this president expects them to get this thing done. Whether it be before August recess or during August recess, the president expects the Senate to fulfill the promises it made to the American people.
Reince, thank you. Thanks for your time. Always good to talk with you.
Thank you, Chris.